Apache girl asked. "If I please you tonight, will you keep me always?" The air was dry and smelled faintly of sage and earth, the kind of smell that clung to the skin after a morning spent walking through the open plains. In a small adobe house at the edge of the settlement, a young Apache girl named Nayeli was already awake. Her dark hair, shiny and straight, fell past her shoulders as she tied it back with a simple leather strap. She was 16, and though she was still young, there was a quiet seriousness in her eyes, a sense of knowing beyond her years. Nayeli's mornings were usually simple and predictable. She would sweep the small courtyard, fetch water from the nearby well, and help her mother prepare breakfast. But today felt different. There was a strange excitement in the air, a sense that something new was about to happen. She didn't know what it was yet, but her heart beat a little faster as she went about her chores. Far off on the horizon, a cloud of dust rose, moving slowly but steadily toward the village. Nayeli noticed it as she carried a basket of freshly baked corn bread. She stopped for a moment, shading her eyes with her hand. The dust grew closer, and soon the shape of a man on horseback became clear. He was not from the village. His clothes were different, lighter in color, and his movements were careful, as if he were watching the world around him with great curiosity. The man rode slowly through the village, nodding politely to a few elders who glanced at him with suspicion. Children ran to hide behind their mothers, whispering to each other about the stranger. Nayeli watched from a distance, curious but cautious. She had heard stories from travelers and merchants who occasionally passed through, but she had never seen a man who looked so different. There was something about him that drew her attention, a calmness and confidence, mixed with a quiet curiosity that mirrored her own. As he dismounted near the water trough, Nayeli's heart beat faster. She had learned to be careful with strangers. Her mother often told her stories of travelers who did not always have kind intentions, and she had been warned to trust her instincts. But there was something in the man's eyes that made her pause. They were deep and steady, not filled with judgment or anger, but with an almost gentle interest. Nayeli slowly approached, her bare feet making soft sounds on the warm sand. She kept her hands busy, pretending to adjust the water jug she had set down. The man looked up and smiled, a small, polite gesture that made her heart flutter unexpectedly. "Good morning," he said in a voice that was both strong and soft at the same time. "I hope I'm not intruding." Nayeli shook her head. "No, you are welcome," she said, her voice steady even though her palms were slightly sweaty. She studied him carefully. He was taller than most men in the village, with hair that glinted in the sun and eyes that seemed to notice everything. He carried no weapons openly, and his hands were clean, but there was a sense that he had traveled far. He nodded, as if reading her thoughts. "My name is Thomas," he said. "I've been traveling for many days, and I wanted to see this village before moving on." Nayeli hesitated for a moment. She had learned a few words of English from travelers passing through, enough to understand simple conversation, but she preferred speaking in her own language. Still, there was a connection forming, an unspoken understanding that crossed the boundaries of language. She introduced herself simply, Nayeli. For the next hour, they walked slowly around the village. Nayeli showed him the small gardens where her family grew corn and beans, and he asked questions politely, listening with genuine interest. He seemed fascinated by the patterns in the plants, the way the sunlight touched the desert soil, and the careful way the villagers worked together. Nayeli felt a sense of pride. She had never spoken to someone from outside in such a way before, and it made her feel important, as though her world had something valuable to offer. As they walked, Thomas told small stories of his travels. He spoke of towns with streets full of people and horses, of rivers that ran wider than any she had ever seen, and of mountains taller than the ones surrounding their village. Nayeli listened, her imagination growing with each word. She pictured herself standing beside him in those distant towns, seeing the world beyond the desert, a world she had only dreamed of. Despite her excitement, Naeli remained cautious. She knew that curiosity could be dangerous, that strangers were not always kind. Still, there was something about Thomas that felt safe. He never spoke down to her or acted as though she were small or unimportant. Instead, he treated her as an equal, as someone whose thoughts and feelings mattered. This was rare in her life, and it drew her to him in ways she did not fully understand. By midday, they reached the edge of the village where the land opened into wide plains. Naeli paused to rest, sitting on a flat rock as Thomas leaned against a tree nearby. The wind carried the scent of sage and the distant mountains, and for a moment the world seemed still. Naeli felt a strange mixture of excitement and fear. She wanted to ask questions, to learn more about him and the places he had been, but she also feared saying something wrong. Thomas looked at her, noticing the hesitation in her eyes. "You are brave to speak with me," he said softly. "Most people would avoid strangers, but you are curious, and that is a good thing. Curiosity is how we learn about the world." Naeli smiled faintly, feeling her cheeks warm. "I like to learn," she admitted. "I want to know what is out there." Thomas nodded, as if understanding something deeper than her words. "The world is bigger than you think, Naeli," he said. "And there are many kinds of people. Some are kind, some are not. But it is important to see, to understand, and to make your own choices." She considered this quietly. She had always felt a pull toward the unknown, toward the places she had only heard about in stories. But she also knew the importance of her family, her culture, and her community. The balance between curiosity and caution was something she had learned early, and today it felt as though that lesson was being tested. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert. Naeli and Thomas sat together, sharing small bits of food her mother had packed. They spoke of family, of dreams, and of what it meant to belong to a place. Naeli discovered that Thomas missed his own home, the place where he had grown up, yet he was drawn to the freedom of traveling. She realized that, even as adults moved through life, they carried a mixture of longing and adventure, much like herself. As the afternoon faded into evening, Naeli knew their time together would soon end. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, and the village began to settle into its quiet rhythm. She felt a pang of sadness at the thought of him leaving, at the idea that this connection might vanish with the coming night. Thomas noticed her expression. "You have a strong heart, Naeli," he said gently. "It is not often I meet someone who is so curious, so thoughtful. Remember that the world is bigger than this village, but it is your strength and wisdom that will guide you." Naeli looked at him, feeling an emotion she could not fully name. It was a mixture of admiration, respect, and something deeper, something that made her heart beat faster and her thoughts swirl. She wanted to ask questions, to know more, to stay, but she also understood that the moment was fragile and that the world outside was vast and uncertain. As Thomas prepared to leave, he offered a small, respectful bow. Naeli nodded, feeling a mixture of sadness and hope. She realized that this encounter, brief as it had been, had opened a new door in her mind. It had shown her a glimpse of what lay beyond the desert, a world filled with possibilities, dangers, and experiences she had only dreamed of. And as she watched him ride slowly away, kicking up dust that lingered in the golden light of evening, Naeli felt a quiet determination settle in her heart. She did not know what the future would hold, or if she would see him again. But she knew that she had crossed a threshold in her own life, a step toward understanding herself, the world, and the power of her own choices. The village returned to its evening calm, but Naeli's mind buzzed with new thoughts, new questions, and new dreams. For the first time, she realized that life was bigger than the small courtyard she had swept that morning. And as she stood there, barefoot on the warm sand, she whispered softly to herself, Maybe one day I will see it all. The days after Thomas's visit passed slowly for Naeli. The village returned to its usual rhythm. Children playing near the river, women weaving blankets and preparing food, men repairing fences and caring for livestock. But for Naeli, the world had shifted slightly. The memory of the tall, kind traveler lingered in her mind like a soft, warm breeze that refused to fade. She found herself thinking about him at unexpected moments, while gathering firewood, carrying water, or helping her mother grind corn. She remembered the way he had listened to her, the gentleness in his voice, and the stories he had shared of distant places. Naeli's curiosity had always been strong, but now it had taken on a new urgency. She wanted to know more, not just about the world beyond the village, but about Thomas himself. Who was he? Where did he come from? Did he think about her as she thought about him? These questions buzzed in her mind constantly, and they made her restless. She could no longer focus entirely on her chores or the conversations with her friends. Her thoughts always drifted to the stranger who had arrived and changed something inside her. One morning, as the sun painted the desert sky in shades of gold and rose, Naeli decided to visit the small hill just outside the village where she had first watched Thomas ride in. She needed to see the horizon, to remind herself of the world beyond, to feel the possibility of something greater. The wind swept through the dry grass and carried the scent of sage, filling her senses with a quiet exhilaration. Sitting on a sun-warmed rock, she closed her eyes for a moment and imagined him there beside her, telling her stories and smiling at her curiosity. It was during these quiet moments that Naeli began to notice changes within herself. She had always been shy with strangers, careful with her words, and careful with her heart. But with Thomas, she felt a strange mixture of boldness and vulnerability. She realized she wanted to speak honestly, to express her thoughts without fear, yet a small part of her worried about overstepping the boundaries that had always been so important in her family and culture. Her heart beat faster at the thought of seeing him again, but she reminded herself to remain patient, understanding that things unfolded slowly in life. A week passed, then another. Naeli's hope of seeing Thomas again was met with silence. Some mornings she would spot a distant figure on the horizon, thinking it might be him, only to see a lone rider who had nothing to do with the village. Each time her heart sank slightly, yet the longing never disappeared. She began to write small thoughts and sketches in a notebook she had found, capturing the stories she imagined they could share, the questions she longed to ask, and the feelings she could not yet name. These private pages became her companions, a way to understand herself and the growing affection she felt toward a man she barely knew. One evening, as the sky turned to deep orange and purple, Naeli was walking to the river to fetch water when she noticed a familiar figure approaching from the horizon. Her heart leapt and she ran the last few steps toward the village entrance, her small sandals kicking up dust. It was Thomas. The same calm, confident posture, the same careful gaze. He slowed as he reached the edge of the village, as if unsure whether he would be welcome, and then his eyes found hers. A smile broke across his face, warm and genuine, and for a moment Naeli felt as if the entire world had fallen away, leaving only the two of them in that quiet desert evening. Thomas dismounted and approached slowly. "Naeli," he said softly, "I hoped I would see you again." Naeli's cheeks flushed, and she looked away for a moment before returning his gaze. I thought I might never see you again," she admitted. Her voice was steady, but her heart pounded as if trying to escape her chest. They walked together to the small garden at the edge of the village, a place where the air was cooler and the scent of corn and sage was strongest. Thomas spoke gently, asking how she had been, listening as she described her daily life, her family, and the small routines of the village. Naeli, in turn, asked him questions about the roads he had traveled, the towns he had seen, and the people he had met. She found herself laughing at his small stories, smiling at his observations, and feeling a sense of connection that she had never experienced before. As the afternoon wore on, a quiet tension settled between them. Nayeli noticed it first, an unspoken awareness that this moment was important, that what she felt was growing stronger, and that she needed to decide whether to speak openly. She felt a nervous excitement, a flutter in her chest, as though her thoughts were trying to escape her mind before she could control them. She realized that her feelings were more than curiosity. They were admiration, trust, and something deeper, a longing for connection and understanding. Finally, as the sun began its slow descent and the shadows stretched long across the desert, Nayeli turned to Thomas. Her voice was soft but clear, and her hands fidgeted slightly with the hem of her dress. "Thomas," she began, hesitating for just a moment, "I have a question and I don't know if I should ask it." Thomas looked at her attentively, encouraging her without words. "You may ask anything, Nayeli," he said quietly. "I will listen." She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. If I please you tonight, will you keep me always?" The words left her lips in a rush, a mixture of fear, hope, and honesty. She immediately wished she could take them back, aware of how bold and unusual they were, yet unable to stop herself. She had spoken from her heart, from a place of longing and vulnerability that she had rarely allowed herself to reveal. Thomas froze for a moment, his expression unreadable. Nayeli's stomach churned, her mind racing with thoughts of regret and embarrassment. She had broken the rules of what was considered proper, but she could not deny the truth of her feelings. She wanted to be seen, understood, and valued, and these words were her attempt to do just that. After a long pause, Thomas spoke, his voice gentle but firm. "Nayeli," he said, "you are brave to speak your heart. Your honesty is rare, and it is something I respect deeply." He paused, looking out at the desert horizon, then back at her. "But you are young, and your life is just beginning. There are so many things you must see, learn, and experience before making decisions that could change everything." Nayeli felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief that he had not laughed at her or dismissed her feelings. Disappointment that she had not received the answer she had hoped for. Yet in that moment, she understood something important. Speaking her truth was an act of courage, and her feelings were valid even if the world around her was not ready to accept them fully. They continued to talk as the sky turned deep purple, sharing small stories and laughing at gentle memories. Nayeli began to see Thomas not just as a figure of fascination, but as someone who cared, someone who could be trusted to listen, and someone whose presence had awakened new thoughts and emotions inside her. She realized that life was not simply about answers or promises. It was about understanding, connection, and the choices each person made in the face of uncertainty. As evening fell and the first stars appeared in the vast desert sky, Nayeli knew that her question had changed something inside her. It had made her braver, more aware of her desires, and more conscious of the complexities of human connection. She felt a new sense of self, a growing confidence that would guide her in the days and weeks to come. Thomas prepared to leave as the night settled over the village. Nayeli watched him mount his horse, the moonlight casting a silver glow over the sand and the distant mountains. She felt a strange mixture of sadness, hope, and determination. She did not know if she would see him again, or if her question would ever be answered fully. But she knew that the courage to ask it had changed her life forever. As he rode into the distance, the dust curling behind him, Nayeli whispered softly to herself, "I will be brave, I will live fully, and I will never forget this day." The desert night embraced her, carrying with it the promise of future adventures, lessons, and discoveries. For Nayeli, the encounter had sparked something far greater than curiosity. It had awakened her heart, challenged her understanding of the world, and planted the seeds of courage that would grow with her through the trials and joys yet to come. The days after Nayeli's bold question. were filled with a strange tension. Though she had spoken her heart honestly, Thomas had not answered the way she had secretly hoped. Yet he had not rejected her either. Naomi found herself walking through the village with her thoughts tangled, feeling both nervous and excited whenever she imagined him riding back toward the settlement. She was learning, in a way she had never known, that feelings could be complicated and that patience could be a form of courage. Thomas, meanwhile, rode slowly along the dusty roads, thinking about the girl who had asked the question. He had traveled many miles and seen many people, but Naomi had left a mark on him unlike anyone else. He remembered her dark, steady eyes, the quiet intelligence in her voice, and the bravery it had taken to speak so openly. He knew the question she had asked was not simply about desire. It was about trust, hope, and a longing for connection. As he reflected, Thomas felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him. He was not a man without experience. He knew the world could be cruel, and he understood the dangers of making promises lightly. Naomi was young, her life only beginning, and he was aware that any choice he made could shape her future forever. He wrestled with his feelings, torn between admiration for her courage, affection for her spirit, and the knowledge that he could not simply give her what she asked without considering the consequences. In the village, Naomi found her thoughts drifting back to him at all hours. She would sit near the river, watching the sunlight dance on the water, imagining Thomas standing beside her, telling stories of distant towns and mountains. The longing she felt was bittersweet. She did not want to force his feelings or demand more than he could give, yet she could not help but hope. Each day she practiced patience. Each day she reminded herself that the heart was not something that could be hurried. One afternoon, Thomas returned to the village. The sun was high in the sky, casting long, golden rays across the dusty earth. Naomi spotted him approaching from the hilltop and ran to meet him, her heart pounding. He dismounted with the same careful grace, looking around as if trying to gauge the village's mood, and then his eyes met hers. The silent understanding between them was immediate, filled with unspoken questions and emotions. They walked together toward the outskirts of the village, where the wind carried the scent of sage and earth. Thomas began speaking gently, asking about Naomi's family and her daily life. She answered carefully, aware that her words carried meaning beyond their simple content. She wanted to be honest, yet she also wanted to protect the fragile bond that was growing between them. He listened with patience, nodding and smiling at her words, and she felt the warmth of his attention, a comfort she had never known before. As they walked, Thomas stopped and looked at the distant mountains. "The world is vast," he said, his voice calm but thoughtful. "There are places where the sky touches the land in ways you cannot imagine, and rivers that run wider than any in this valley. There are people who will help you and people who will try to harm you. Life is full of choices, and every choice changes us." Naomi listened intently, absorbing every word. She realized that he was not speaking simply to tell stories, but to teach her something important, that life was more than the boundaries of the village, and that courage was not just about speaking, but also about making thoughtful decisions. She felt a deep respect for him, a recognition that he understood the world in ways she had not yet experienced. After a while, they reached a quiet hilltop that overlooked the village. The wind tugged at Naomi's hair and dress, and she felt a sense of freedom she had never felt before. Here, she could see the wide desert stretching endlessly, the mountains rising proudly in the distance, and the village below, small but vibrant. It was a place where stories began and ended, where decisions were made and where hearts were tested. Thomas turned to her, his expression serious but gentle. "Naomi," he said softly, "when you asked me that question, you showed courage beyond your years. But I need you to understand something. Words spoken in hope can carry weight, and I cannot promise what I cannot be certain of. I respect you too much to give a simple answer that might not be true tomorrow." Naomi's stomach twisted with nervous anticipation, but she nodded. She had sensed that this moment would be complicated. She had expected no easy answer, and yet her heart still wished for one. "I understand," she said softly. "I only wanted to know, I only wanted to speak honestly." Thomas smiled faintly, a warmth in his eyes that eased some of her anxiety. "And you have," he said. "That honesty is rare and valuable. You have taught me something as well, Naomi. You have reminded me that courage is not about strength alone, but about the willingness to open your heart, even when the future is uncertain." The sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Naomi felt a sudden rush of emotion, a mixture of hope and fear, desire and uncertainty. She realized that her feelings for Thomas were deeper than she had understood, and that the questions she had asked would continue to shape her thoughts and dreams. Yet she also understood that life was more than the immediate moment. It was a series of choices, challenges, and lessons that required patience and wisdom. They continued to talk as the wind whispered through the dry grass. Naomi asked questions about his travels, about the people he had met, and about the lessons he had learned. Thomas answered carefully, sharing stories that were both fascinating and instructive, teaching her about courage, kindness, and the importance of listening to one's heart. Naomi felt a sense of growth within herself, a quiet confidence that came from understanding more of the world and her place within it. As evening approached, Thomas spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. "Naomi, there is a world beyond this village, and I believe you are capable of seeing it, learning from it, and choosing your path wisely. But you are still young, and life will ask much of you before any promises can be made. For now, let us focus on understanding, on friendship, and on the trust we have begun to build." Naomi nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and disappointment. She had hoped for more, yet she realized that what he offered was just as valuable: honesty, respect, and guidance. She understood that relationships were not simply about immediate gratification, but about trust, patience, and shared understanding. The moment had deepened her feelings, yet it had also taught her an important lesson about life and the heart. The night fell, cool and quiet, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. Naomi and Thomas sat together for a while, watching the village glow softly in the moonlight. They shared small stories, exchanged gentle laughter, and spoke of dreams without promises. Naomi felt a growing sense of connection, a feeling that what they had shared could endure even without immediate answers or guarantees. Before departing, Thomas looked at her with a serious yet kind expression. "Remember, Naomi," he said, "courage is not always about asking questions or seeking answers. It is about living honestly, treating others with respect, and following your heart while understanding the world around you. That is the path to true strength." Naomi absorbed his words, feeling their weight settle deep in her heart. She realized that her journey was just beginning, that courage and understanding would guide her, and that the bonds she was forming, though complicated, were teaching her lessons she would carry forever. As Thomas rode away, the desert wind swept through the hilltop, carrying with it the quiet promise of new beginnings, challenges, and discoveries. Naomi watched him disappear into the horizon, her heart full of hope, her mind buzzing with thoughts of the future, and her spirit quietly strengthened by the courage she had discovered within herself. The village returned to its evening calm, but Naomi could not return to her usual routine immediately. She walked slowly through the small streets, touching the walls of adobe houses, listening to the distant laughter of children, and feeling the steady heartbeat of the village life. Everything felt the same and yet profoundly changed. She understood that life was a mixture of joy and challenge, of connection and distance, and that her choices, big or small, would shape her path in ways she could not yet imagine. That night, as she lay beneath the stars, Naomi thought about Thomas, about her question, and about the courage it had taken to speak. She realized that love and trust were not simple things, and that patience was a form of strength. Her heart was full of longing, yet she was no longer afraid to feel, to hope, or to imagine. In the quiet desert night, she whispered softly to herself, "I will be brave, I will learn, and I will follow my heart." The wind rustled through the sagebrush outside her window, carrying the scent of earth and possibility. Nayeli closed her eyes, feeling a sense of calm determination. She understood now that life was not about immediate answers, but about growing, learning, and cherishing the connections that touched the heart. The world was vast and full of unknowns, yet she felt ready, in a small but profound way, to face it. After Thomas left the village that evening, a quiet settled over Nayeli's small home. The air smelled faintly of sage and earth, and the desert night stretched endlessly beyond the adobe walls. But despite the stillness, Nayeli's mind was far from calm. Her thoughts raced in every direction, replaying the events of the past days, her bold question, and Thomas's gentle, thoughtful response. She realized that her life had shifted in a way she could not fully describe, that a single moment had opened doors she had never noticed before. Nayeli found it difficult to concentrate on her daily chores. Sweeping the courtyard, carrying water, or helping her mother cook seemed mechanical, almost distant, as her thoughts returned again and again to Thomas. She thought about the way he had listened, the respect in his voice, and the stories he had told. She remembered the sun on his hair, the careful way he moved, and the way his eyes seemed to see beyond her outward appearance to the heart beneath. Her feelings were complicated, a mixture of admiration, longing, and a growing awareness of herself that she had never experienced before. Her family began to notice the change. Her mother, wise and observant, watched Nayeli closely. She noticed how her daughter lingered by the door, gazing at the horizon, or how she seemed lost in thought when asked simple questions. Her younger siblings whispered among themselves about the quiet seriousness that now clung to her like a shadow. Nayeli did not speak much of Thomas or the question she had asked, but her mother's eyes held understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that the world outside their village had touched her daughter's heart. In the village, rumors began to spread slowly. Travelers who came and went carried stories with them, and some curious villagers spoke in whispers about the young Apache girl who had met a stranger and asked a bold question. Though few people fully understood the meaning behind her words, the gossip added a subtle tension to her life. Nayeli felt it keenly, a reminder that courage often came with consequences. She understood that actions, no matter how sincere or honest, could ripple outward, affecting others in ways she could not control. One afternoon, a week after Thomas's visit, Nayeli decided to walk to the hill where they had last spoken. The sun was high, casting sharp shadows across the desert floor. She carried a small basket of water, her steps careful on the uneven ground. Sitting on the warm rock where they had shared quiet conversation, she closed her eyes and imagined Thomas beside her. She thought about the way he had spoken, the advice he had given, and the kindness he had shown. A mixture of hope and anxiety filled her heart. She longed to see him again, to speak freely, yet she knew that life was unpredictable and that waiting required patience and courage. Meanwhile, Thomas traveled slowly from town to town, his thoughts returning often to Nayeli. He remembered her question vividly, the bravery it had taken to speak, and the depth of feeling behind her words. Yet he was acutely aware of the responsibilities that weighed upon him. He knew that his presence in her life, though brief, had created hope and expectation. He wrestled with the knowledge that any promise could carry unforeseen consequences, and he did not want to offer reassurance that could lead to disappointment. His days were filled with contemplation, and his nights were often restless, as he considered the balance between care, honesty, and responsibility. Back in the village, Nayeli found comfort in the small routines of her life, yet each task reminded her of what she longed for. When she tended the garden, she thought about Thomas walking beside her, asking questions about the plants. When she fetched water from the river, she imagined his quiet laughter at her small observations. The ordinary moments of life had become infused with memory and longing, and she began to notice subtle changes in herself. She felt more aware, more reflective, and more courageous in her thoughts. She realized that courage did not always mean speaking aloud. Sometimes it meant holding space for feelings, understanding their meaning, and learning how to live with them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Naeli's mother approached her quietly. She placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "I see the changes in you, Naeli," she said softly. "Your heart has grown, and your mind has seen more than it did before. Remember that every choice we make has meaning, and every feeling we carry must be honored, even when it is difficult." Naeli nodded, feeling both comforted and challenged by her mother's wisdom. She understood that the path she was on was not simple, and that her feelings for Thomas were only a part of a larger journey of self-discovery. The days turned into weeks, and eventually, Thomas returned once more to the village. This time, his arrival was not announced, and Naeli spotted him first from the hilltop. Her heart leapt, and she ran down the slope, the wind tugging at her hair and dress. He greeted her with a gentle nod, and together they walked to the quiet hill overlooking the village. The evening sun cast long shadows, and the desert seemed to hold its breath as they spoke. Thomas noticed the change in Naeli as well. She moved with a quiet confidence, her gaze steady, her words thoughtful. There was a maturity in her demeanor, a reflection of the inner growth that had been nurtured by their conversations, her own reflection, and the passage of time. He admired her courage and her spirit, yet he remained cautious, knowing that their bond, though genuine, required care and respect. They spoke at length, sharing memories of past conversations, reflecting on lessons learned, and discussing the complexities of the world beyond the village. Naeli asked questions about distant towns, the people Thomas had met, and the choices he had made in life. He answered with honesty, sharing both triumphs and regrets, teaching her that life was rarely simple and that every decision carried weight. Naeli listened carefully, absorbing his words, and felt a deepening understanding of herself and the world. As the evening wore on, the conversation grew quieter, more reflective. Naeli felt the emotions she had carried for so long rising to the surface: admiration, longing, and the desire to be understood and valued. She realized that her feelings for Thomas were no longer fleeting curiosity. They had become a part of her identity, shaping her thoughts, her dreams, and her courage. Yet she also understood the fragility of the bond they shared, the importance of patience, and the necessity of respect for one another's choices. Finally, as night settled over the village, Thomas turned to her with a serious but gentle expression. "Naeli," he said softly, "we have shared many moments and I have come to respect and care for you deeply. But the world is complicated and our connection, though meaningful, must be handled with care. You are young and your life is just beginning. I cannot offer promises lightly, but I can offer honesty, respect, and guidance." Naeli nodded, understanding the truth in his words. She felt a mixture of relief and sadness, yet she knew that what he offered was valuable. She realized that relationships were not simply about immediate answers or fulfillment of desires. They were about trust, understanding, and the careful balance between hearts and circumstances. Over the next few days, the village became a place of reflection for Naeli. She walked quietly through the streets, noticing the ordinary details that had previously seemed mundane. The sound of children playing, the rhythm of work in the fields, the scent of food cooking in adobe homes. Everything seemed more vivid now, more meaningful, as if her experiences with Thomas had sharpened her perception of life and its delicate beauty. She also noticed the subtle reactions of the villagers. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with quiet admiration, and a few with suspicion. She understood that courage often came with social consequences, and that being honest and open about one's feelings could create both admiration and tension. Nayeli accepted this, recognizing that the path to personal growth was rarely simple or easy. One evening, she visited the river, carrying water and letting the cool breeze brush against her skin. She watched the reflection of the moon in the rippling water and thought about Thomas, about their conversations, and about the courage it had taken to speak honestly. She realized that her life had been forever changed by those few moments, and that she had grown in ways she could not have imagined. Her heart was stronger, her mind more aware, and her spirit more courageous. As the night deepened, Nayeli whispered to herself, "Life is not simple, but I am ready. I will face it with courage, honesty, and care." She understood that the consequences of her choices and feelings were ongoing, that every day brought new challenges and lessons, and that her connection with Thomas, though complicated, had taught her the meaning of trust, respect, and emotional growth. In the quiet of the desert night, with stars scattered across the sky, Nayeli felt a profound sense of resilience. She knew that the world was wide and unpredictable, yet she was learning to navigate it with patience and understanding. Her bond with Thomas had introduced her to new emotions, new perspectives, and new challenges, and she accepted that these were part of the journey of growing up, of becoming aware of her own heart, and of learning the delicate balance between desire and wisdom. The days continued, filled with the ordinary rhythms of village life, yet Nayeli carried within her the extraordinary lessons of courage, honesty, and connection. She knew that the choices she made now would shape her future, and she embraced this responsibility with a quiet determination. Each step she took, each thought she nurtured, and each emotion she allowed herself to feel became part of the foundation upon which she would build her life. The desert stretched wide and silent as dawn broke over the village. The air smelled of sage and earth, carrying the cool promise of a new day. Nayeli awoke quietly, careful not to disturb her younger siblings who still slept soundly under thin blankets. She stretched and gazed out of the small window, her eyes following the first rays of sunlight as they lit the distant hills. The village was slowly coming to life. The rhythmic clatter of feet on adobe floors, the soft murmurs of conversation, the distant crowing of a rooster, but Nayeli's thoughts were elsewhere. She thought about Thomas, about his visits, and about the courage it had taken for her to speak her heart. She remembered the question she had asked, the pause that followed, and the gentle honesty in his reply. She realized now that their time together had changed her in ways she could not fully measure. It had not given her everything she might have hoped for, yet it had given her something far more valuable, a deeper understanding of herself, of life, and of the meaning of trust. Nayeli rose quietly and made her way outside. The desert wind brushed against her skin, cool and invigorating, carrying the scent of distant mountains and sun-warmed sand. She walked slowly toward the small hill that overlooked the village, the place where she and Thomas had spent so many reflective hours. Sitting on the warm rock, she watched the sun climb higher, turning the sky into shades of gold and pink. In this quiet, solitary moment, she felt a sense of peace, as though the desert itself had acknowledged the growth she carried within her. As the morning passed, Nayeli continued her daily tasks, but she approached them with a new awareness. When she tended the garden, she noticed the intricate patterns of leaves and the way sunlight danced on the soil. When she fetched water from the river, she felt the cool rush of the stream and reflected on how life moved, steady and unstoppable. Everything seemed brighter, sharper, and more meaningful. She understood now that life's beauty was not just in extraordinary moments, but in ordinary ones as well, when attention, care, and heart combined. Her family noticed the changes in her too. Her mother observed the way she carried herself, calm and deliberate, and the quiet wisdom in her eyes. Her siblings watched with curiosity, sensing that Nayeli had grown, though they could not yet articulate why. Nayeli's father, who had been silent most of the day, nodded at her one evening, a gesture of quiet approval that filled her with warmth. She realized that the lessons of courage, honesty, and understanding were not just personal. They touched those around her, influencing the village in subtle, meaningful ways. Weeks turned into months, and life continued its steady rhythm. Thomas's visits became less frequent, though each one was still filled with the same respect, curiosity, and gentle care. Their conversations remained rich, thoughtful, and reflective. Nayeli learned more about the world beyond the village, about towns and mountains, rivers and forests, people, and their ways of living. Yet she also realized that the most important lessons were not in the distant places themselves, but in the way she processed them, understood them, and applied them to her life. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the desert in shades of orange and purple, Thomas and Nayeli sat together on the hilltop. The wind carried a quiet calm, and the sky reflected their shared silence. Thomas turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "Nayeli," he said softly, "the time we share is precious, but I want you to understand that life is more than these moments. It is in the choices we make every day, the courage we summon quietly, and the love and respect we carry in our hearts. You have grown remarkably, and I am proud of you." Nayeli looked at him, her chest full of emotion. She wanted to speak, to pour out the feelings that had been building inside her for months. Yet she also understood the wisdom in his words, that love and connection were not just about immediate answers, but about guidance, patience, and mutual respect. She nodded, feeling the weight and the truth of what he said settle in her heart. Over the following weeks, Nayeli reflected often on their relationship. She realized that Thomas had not simply been a stranger who passed through her life. He had been a teacher of sorts, showing her the value of honesty, courage, and thoughtful reflection. She also realized that she had learned to value herself in new ways, that her desires, her curiosity, and her voice mattered. Speaking her truth, even without a clear answer, had been a lesson in bravery that would stay with her forever. Life in the village continued, and Nayeli began to notice how much she had changed. She walked with confidence among her peers, spoke her thoughts more clearly to her family, and approached challenges with calm determination. Even small decisions, what to plant in the garden, how to resolve a dispute between friends, how to balance her chores, felt different. She approached them with thoughtfulness and courage, understanding that even ordinary choices could shape the future in meaningful ways. One day, Nayeli's mother approached her with a small woven basket filled with dried herbs and flowers. "These are for you, Nayeli," she said softly. "They are reminders that life is beautiful, even when it is complicated. Take them with you when you go to the hill, and remember that every step you take, every choice you make, carries meaning." Nayeli accepted the basket with gratitude, feeling her mother's quiet wisdom settle deep in her heart. She understood that guidance and love could take many forms, and that her mother had given her strength in ways both visible and invisible. When Thomas returned once more, Nayeli was ready. She greeted him with a calm smile, her heart steady yet open. They walked together to their favorite hill, carrying the basket of herbs and flowers. The wind whispered around them, and the desert stretched endlessly in every direction. Sitting together, they shared memories, reflections, and quiet laughter. Nayeli felt a sense of completion, not in answers or promises, but in understanding, the realization that their connection had shaped her, taught her, and prepared her for the life she would continue to build. As the sun set, Thomas turned to her, his voice gentle. "Nayeli, you have grown in ways that inspire me. Your courage, your honesty, and your respect for the world around you will carry you far. I cannot promise what the future will hold, but I can promise that I will always respect the person you are and the journey you undertake." Nayeli smiled, feeling a quiet sense of peace. "Thank you, Thomas," she said softly. "You have taught me so much, not just about the world but about myself. I will carry your lessons with me, and I will face the future with courage and care." The sky turned deep blue, dotted with countless stars, and the desert night embraced them in its quiet stillness. Naomi felt a warmth in her heart, a sense of completion, and an understanding that life, with all its uncertainty and beauty, was hers to shape. She realized that connection, courage, and honesty were more powerful than any single answer or promise. They were the foundation upon which she could build her life, making choices with confidence, wisdom, and care. Over the following months, Naomi continued to grow. She tended the garden with patience, helped her family with dedication, and shared her knowledge and experiences with younger children in the village. She spoke with confidence, listened with empathy, and faced challenges with steady courage. Her connection with Thomas remained, though their visits were now less frequent. Yet the lessons, the memories, and the understanding they shared stayed with her, shaping her thoughts, her heart, and her spirit. One quiet morning, Naomi sat on the hill alone, watching the sunrise. She reflected on the journey she had undertaken, from the first day she met Thomas, to the moment she had spoken her heart, to the months of growth, reflection, and learning that followed. She realized that life was full of challenges and uncertainties, but also of beauty, connection, and possibility. Her courage had opened doors, her honesty had nurtured trust, and her patience had allowed her to understand the true meaning of relationships. She whispered softly to herself, "I will live with courage, with honesty, and with care. I will honor the lessons I have learned, and I will continue to grow." The desert stretched endlessly around her, a reminder that the world was wide, full of possibilities, and hers to explore. That evening, as the village settled into calm, Naomi felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. She had learned that life was not simply about answers or promises, but about understanding, courage, and the careful balance between heart and wisdom. She understood that love and connection were gifts that required patience and care, and that true strength came from within. And as the stars shone brightly above, she felt a deep sense of peace. Naomi had faced her fears, spoken her truth, and learned the lessons of courage and honesty. She knew that life would continue to bring challenges and uncertainties, but she also knew that she was ready to face them. The journey she had begun with a single question had shaped her, strengthened her, and prepared her for the many paths yet to come. Naomi rose from the hilltop and walked back to her home, the wind brushing against her skin, the desert quiet around her. She carried the lessons, the memories, and the courage she had gained like a steady flame within her. And in that quiet, still night, she understood something profound. Life was not simply about what was given or promised, but about the strength to live honestly, the courage to speak one's heart, and the wisdom to grow from every moment. For Naomi, the journey had begun with a single brave question, and it would continue for a lifetime, carrying with it the lessons of courage, love, honesty, and hope.